Welcome back to Context Channel, everyone. Today we're diving into a dramatic shift in regional military posture. Japan's decision to deploy missiles to an island extremely close to Taiwan.
And wow, that's a bold move. So, tell me exactly what's Japan doing and how does this change things?
All right, so here's the setup. Japan is planning to deploy medium range missiles on one of the islands in the Ryukyu chain, specifically over at places like Yonaguni, which, get this, is less than 70 miles away from
Right.
Taiwan. It's a classic deterrence strategy that transforms these islands into a sort of stationary anti access platform.
Less than 70 miles, that's practically next door in military terms. And these aren't your garden variety missiles. They're capable of hitting targets across the Taiwan Strait and even mainland China, correct?
Exactly. And what's fascinating is how this marks a seismic shift from Japan's post war stance of pacifism to a much more proactive, if not aggressive, defense posture.
Yeah, no kidding.
Historically, Japan kept its military strictly self defense, but now it's stepping out to actively deter Chinese moves.
Right. And this makes Japan not just a recipient of US protection, but an active player.
Yes, it's like, imagine you've always been on the defensive, slowly tuning out an adversary, and one day you decide to fire back with strategic power right at the border. This move essentially raises the cost for any Chinese invasion scenario against Taiwan by endangering vital maritime choke points and sea lanes.
Definitely raises the stakes. And speaking of stakes, let's discuss China's reaction. Beijing's response, as reported, was one of sharp condemnation, wasn't it?
Precisely. According to Reuters and NBC, China immediately slammed the move as a violation of regional peace. They argue that Japan is interfering in what they consider an internal matter, Taiwan. Beyond legal debates, Beijing is drawing on memories of Japan's militaristic past to paint a moral and diplomatic portrait of disapproval.
Right, that historical angle is powerful. It almost feels like Beijing wants to use international pressure to isolate Japan diplomatically.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets even more complex. China's escalatory reaction isn't just confined to bilateral outbursts. They've taken the spat all the way to the United Nations, aiming to globalize the issue.
Yeah, moving it onto the global stage. So the UN move is essentially a diplomatic tactic, right? Trying to frame Japan as the aggressor.
Exactly. Beijing's strategy is to isolate Japan by painting it as the destabilizer. They're using the international forum to apply pressure on US allies in Europe and elsewhere, suggesting that Japan's militaristic shift could unsettle global trade flows as well.
That economic tie-in definitely makes things more interesting. Speaking of economic ties, how does this military deployment affect global trade, actually?
That's a key point. The Ryukyu Islands are at the heart of one of the world's most critical maritime corridors. Tankers, container ships, you name it, they all traverse these waters. The introduction of high powered missile systems, even if intended for deterrence, hikes up the insurance premiums on shipping
Yeah, so
routes.
even the threat could deter trade. But here's a question. Isn't all of this fundamentally defensive? I mean, if these missiles prevent a Chinese invasion, wouldn't that, in theory, preserve stability for trade in the long run?
That's the dilemma, right? It's the paradox of deterrence. On one hand, placing these assets in such a critical location ensures that any potential aggression is met with immediate and forceful response. On the other, the very act of deploying them makes the region inherently more unstable.
hmm It's like trying to balance on a knife edge. So it becomes a classic case of defensive measures inadvertently fueling further escalation.
Exactly. And this is compounded by the fact that the operational integration between Japan and the US forces is becoming tighter. It essentially locks the US further into the conflict, meaning that any misstep might pull in extra players into a potentially blazing regional conflict.
Right, so the alliance network is now even more of a double edged sword. That kind of integration has huge implications for regional stability and peace.
Absolutely. And then there's the internal political shift in Japan itself. We're talking about a fundamental drift to the right. Politicians advocating for rearmament, like the notable names highlighted by CNN and SCMP, are challenging decades of pacifism.
Yeah, it's fascinating how domestic politics can redirect national security strategies. So, would you say that this missile deployment is not just a reaction to Chinese behavior, but also a manifestation of Japan's internal political realignment?
Precisely. It's not a one off decision. This shift indicates a broader consensus among some Japanese leaders that relying solely on the American nuclear umbrella isn't sufficient anymore. Instead, Japan is moving to enhance its own defensive capabilities by incorporating long range strike systems.
Definitely a long term strategic reorientation. And this internal shift has direct implications for regional arms races, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. The missile deployment is a physical manifestation of that political drift. It signals that Japan, for the first time since World War II, is willing to actively project military power in its neighborhood. This isn't just about deterring China, it's about reshaping the entire security architecture of East Asia.
Yeah, that's a fundamental change. Now, let's address the economic warfare angle. Listeners are asking, how does this military move tie into potential economic fallout?
Great question. The economic angle here is profound. With these missile systems, any conflict, intentional or accidental, could disrupt shipping lanes that are vital for the global supply chain. Imagine oil tankers and container ships rerouting because of heightened risks. This not only raises shipping costs, but in turn could trigger inflation across economies that depend on these trade routes.
That domino effect can be huge. So, even if there isn't an outright conflict, the mere threat is enough to stoke economic uncertainty globally.
Exactly. It's a form of economic warfare by proxy. Even the threat of instability in critical trade areas leads to elevated insurance costs, disrupted investment flows, and overall market jitters.
Right? And that uncertainty can ripple through economies worldwide. Now, I do have one slight challenge on one of these points. You mentioned that this missile deployment might improve Japanese defensive capabilities, but isn't it also true that by taking such an aggressive stance, Japan risks provoking an even stronger response from Beijing?
That's a very good point. While it's true that Japan believes these measures are necessary for its survival, especially concerning Taiwan's security, which directly impacts Japan's strategic sea lanes, the risk of escalation is very real. It might indeed force Beijing into a more aggressive posture, creating a self fulfilling prophecy of conflict.
That's definitely a double edged sword. So, while the intent is deterrence, the risk is increased, multidimensional conflict, right?
Exactly. And that brings us to the final takeaway. The key elements here are the military, diplomatic, and political dimensions. First, from a military perspective, deploying these missiles transforms the Ryukyu chain into a contested front line, directly challenging Chinese strategy.
Right, very direct.
Second, diplomatically, this escalates the conflict to a global stage. China taking the issue to the UN is a clear sign that the battle isn't confined to the region anymore. And third, politically, Japan's drift to the right isn't a temporary blip. It signifies a long term change in how Japan views its role and national security policy.
That's comprehensively shifting the regional equilibrium. It's really a pivotal moment. And this brings up the question, has the era of Japanese pacifism finally ended?
Many argue it has. The missile deployment is more than just a tactical maneuver. It's an ideological and strategic pivot from a post war defensive stance to a more assertive military posture. Certainly, Japan's decision is redefining its identity on the world stage, and that could have lasting repercussions for US Japan China relations.
Exactly, it's reshaping alliances and potentially redrawing regional security lines. And with these new alignments, every miscalculation is magnified, affecting global trade and geopolitical stability alike.
Absolutely. The integration of military strategy with economic considerations and internal political shifts creates a very complex and, frankly, dangerous landscape. Every step forward in deterrence is matched by an equal risk of escalation.
It's a very precarious balance indeed. As we wrap up, it's clear that this development is going to be central to discussions on global security in the near future. Thanks for unpacking these crucial details today.
Thank you. And to everyone listening, keep tracking these power plays, because as we've seen, what happens on these islands doesn't just stay local, it ripples across the globe.